Dine and Die. My name's Jed. Most folks around here just know me as the guy who brings the coffee refills and serves up plates of greasy eggs and pancakes. I've worked at Billy's Diner for 3 years now, a no-frills joint off the main road in town. It's the kind of place where the counter stools are worn smooth, where regulars can recite the menu by heart, and where gossip sticks in the air like the smell of bacon grease. Not glamorous, but it's home. And on that day, everything felt normal. Until it wasn't. I started my shift that morning like always, running through the early rush, getting coffee brewing, flipping chairs down from tables, and prepping my section. My co-worker Maggie, a fiery redhead who could toss a frying pan better than anyone I knew, was back in the kitchen yelling orders at Pete, our short-tempered cook with a heart of gold hidden under layers of sarcasm. Pete was a grizzled old guy with a cigarette-roughened voice and a thin mustache that he stroked when he got flustered. And with Maggie shouting, he was definitely flustered. "Jed, order up," Maggie called, sliding plates across the counter. "Where's that charm of yours? We got 3 customers asking for you specifically." I grinned, picking up the plates. Maggie liked to tease, but she always had my back. We'd been through our share of late nights and early mornings at Billy's, keeping each other sane through double shifts and hangry regulars. There was a sense of camaraderie between us, a shared understanding that no one else outside of Billy's would really get. The regulars were all there too. Old Man Harry in his usual corner booth, sipping coffee and scratching away at his crossword. He'd been a postal worker before retirement, and now he spent his days at Billy's with his nose in the paper. Across from him sat Tammy, a waitress at the bar down the street, still in her uniform from her overnight shift. She was slouched over her toast, looking like she'd slept about 2 hours in the past week. I brought Harry his 3rd coffee refill. "How's it going, Harry?" He looked up, his face a bit pale, a thin sheen of sweat on his brow. "Just another day, Jed. Got a bit of a bug, I think, but I'll be fine." "You sure? You don't look so hot." I gave him a concerned glance. He waved me off, chuckling weakly. "I've been through worse, son." I shrugged, making a mental note to check on him later. It wasn't unusual for Harry to catch the occasional cold, but something in his eyes unsettled me. The lunch crowd started rolling in, filling the booths and tables. The noise level rose, the sound of chatter, clinking dishes and the sizzling of the grill filling the air. I was in my groove, balancing plates and making small talk with customers, when I noticed the subtle tension in the diner, a stiffness, an unease that buzzed at the edges of the usual routine. At around noon, things started to take a turn. Harry had gone quiet, his hand trembling as he reached for his coffee. Tammy muttered something under her breath, swaying slightly as she clutched her toast. Across the diner, a few customers were coughing, a rough, painful sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Maggie's voice cut through the room. "Jed, you seeing this? What's going on?" I shrugged, but my stomach churned. I didn't have an answer, but it was clear something wasn't right. I pushed the thought aside and kept working, but it gnawed at me. My gut said this was more than just an unlucky bug going around. I glanced toward the kitchen, catching Maggie's eye. She gave me a raised eyebrow, her way of saying, "Something's up." But before I could respond, there was a sudden crash from the corner booth. Old Man Harry had collapsed, his coffee cup shattering on the floor. Tammy shrieked, her toast falling from her hands as she backed away from him, wide-eyed. My heart leapt into my throat as I rushed over, customers standing up and craning their necks to see. "Harry? Hey, Harry, are you okay?" I asked, kneeling beside him, my hand on his shoulder. His skin felt clammy, colder than it should have been. His eyes fluttered open, but they looked off, cloudy, unfocused, like he was seeing something none of us could. He groaned, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the diner. Then, to my horror, He lunged, teeth snapping toward my arm with a strength I didn't expect from a guy his age. "Jed, watch out!" Maggie's shout jolted me, and I pulled back just in time, stumbling into a table and sending silverware clattering. "Harry, what the hell?" I gasped, heart racing. But he wasn't listening, he wasn't there. He moved toward me, staggering but fast, his mouth opening in a sick, twisted grimace. The other customers screamed, chairs scraping as they scrambled back, trying to get away from Harry, who was now moving like some kind of wild animal. He lunged at Tammy, who was frozen in place, terror written all over her face. Before I could react, he'd grabbed her by the arm and sunk his teeth into her shoulder. The sound was sickening, a wet, tearing noise that made my stomach turn. "Tammy, no!" I shouted, grabbing a metal tray from a nearby table and swinging it at Harry with everything I had. The tray collided with his head, knocking him back just long enough for me to pull Tammy free. But it was too late. Her eyes were already rolling back, and blood was pouring from the bite wound on her shoulder. The room erupted in chaos. People bolted for the door, shoving each other aside in their panic to escape. Maggie ran up beside me, holding a cast-iron skillet from the kitchen, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle. "What the hell is going on, Jed?" she panted, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but we need to get everyone out of here," I yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the other customers who were still inside. "Everyone, to the back! Lock the doors!" But as we herded people toward the kitchen, the situation went from bad to worse. Tammy, now deathly pale, let out a low guttural growl. Her eyes snapped open and she staggered to her feet, blood dripping down her shoulder. She wasn't the Tammy we knew anymore. She turned toward us, her mouth twisted in a snarl, and lunged. One of the busboys, Mike, was closest to her. She grabbed him, teeth sinking into his neck, and he let out a strangled scream before going limp. I grabbed Maggie and yanked her back, both of us stumbling into the kitchen. "Barricade the door!" I shouted. She didn't hesitate, grabbing tables, chairs, anything we could find to pile against the door. My heart pounded as I watched through the small window in the kitchen door. The diner I'd worked at for years was now a scene out of a nightmare. Harry and Tammy, no, the things they had become, were clawing at the door, their faces twisted into unnatural expressions, mouths smeared with blood. "This can't be happening," Maggie whispered, clutching the skillet to her chest. I glanced at her, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll figure it out. But right now, we can't stay here." She nodded, her hands shaking, but her eyes were determined. "Then let's grab whatever we can use as weapons and get out of here." We rummaged through the kitchen, finding a couple of knives, a heavy rolling pin we could throw if things got too close. Armed with our makeshift weapons, we stood by the door, bracing ourselves. A loud bang from the front of the diner made us jump. I peeked through the small window and saw more people staggering in, people from town, all with that same vacant, hungry look. Whatever this was, it wasn't just happening here, it was everywhere. "Jed," Maggie whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're not human anymore, are they?" I shook my head, swallowing the lump of fear in my throat. "No, I don't think they are." Maggie and I held our breath, pressed against the cold metal kitchen door, as the infected slammed themselves against it, snarling and clawing. Their frenzied growls and relentless banging filled the diner, echoing through the thin walls, making my skin crawl. It sounded like the end of the world was beating down our door. "Jed, what do we do?" Maggie asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The fear in her eyes matched my own. "We stick together," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the panic pounding in my chest. "Grab anything that looks like it can hurt, and we find a way out." She nodded, tightening her grip on the skillet. I handed her one of the knives and kept another for myself, trying to calm my racing thoughts. All my life, I'd thought I could handle anything that came my way. But this was like nothing I'd ever prepared for. We crouched low, creeping toward the narrow hallway that led to the back exit. I knew every inch of the diner like the back of my hand, knew which floorboards creaked, which door hinges squeaked. But tonight, even my familiar sanctuary felt hostile, like the walls were closing in. Just as we reached the exit, a loud crash erupted from the front. My heart sank as I turned and saw the door buckle under the weight of the infected crowd pressing against it. They were tearing through tables, stepping over overturned chairs, and trampling broken dishes in their frenzy. I could make out faces I knew: Harry, Tammy, Mr. Palmer from the grocery store, Liza, who worked at the flower shop, a couple of regulars. Now they were empty shells, driven by hunger alone. "Maggie, go first," I urged, nudging her toward the back exit. She nodded, moving quickly, but just as she reached for the handle, the door jammed. "Are you kidding me?" she muttered, frantically jiggling the handle. My stomach turned. I could hear the infected getting closer, their snarls intensifying. "We need to find another way out, now!" I yanked Maggie back into the kitchen. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route. The small window above the sink was our only shot. It was narrow, but we might be able to squeeze through. "Help me up," Maggie whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. I cupped my hands, boosting her up to the window ledge. She struggled, finally managing to pull herself through, and extended a hand down to me. But just as I was about to follow, the door burst open, and Harry and 2 other infected staggered inside, their eyes dead and their jaws snapping. "Jed!" Maggie screamed, her arm stretched out toward me. I backed up, heart hammering as I held my knife out in front of me. They advanced, their rotting hands reaching, their mouths dripping with blood and remnants of flesh. Harry lunged forward, and I slashed at him, the blade sinking into his decaying skin, dark blood spurting out, but I couldn't hold them off for long. "Go!" I shouted to Maggie, my voice raw with fear. "I'll find another way out." She hesitated, her face torn with worry, but I nodded, urging her to leave. Finally, she pulled herself up, disappearing out the window, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I turned back to the infected, now mere feet away. With every fiber of my being, I fought them off, using every bit of strength I had, slashing and dodging. But they were relentless, clawing at me, teeth snapping dangerously close. Finally, with one last desperate shove, I managed to break free, sprinting toward back the main dining area, hoping to find an escape. The diner was unrecognizable. Tables were overturned, chairs scattered, the floor slick with blood. Broken dishes crunched underfoot as I made my way through the chaos, heart racing as I aimed for the exit. The main door near the front. My last shot. I bolted toward it. But just as I reached the door, a hand shot out, grabbing my arm. I whipped around, knife at the ready, only to find myself face to face with someone I never expected to see. It was Mike, the busboy. But he wasn't Mike anymore. His face was twisted, his eyes glassy, his mouth pulled back in a grotesque snarl. His grip was iron strong, fingers digging into my arm as he lunged toward me. With a surge of adrenaline, I jerked free, stabbing my knife into his shoulder. He howled, staggering back, and I didn't waste a second. I threw open the main door and stumbled out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. Maggie was waiting for me outside, her face pale and eyes wide. "Jed, are you okay?" I nodded, though my hands were still shaking. "We need to get out of here now. There's no telling how far this has spread." Together, we sprinted down the street, the moans and growls of the infected echoing in the distance. The town I'd known all my life was descending into chaos, and every step we took away from the diner brought us closer to a horrifying reality. People were running in every direction, screams cutting through the night as more and more fell victim to the infected. I could hear sirens in the distance, but even they were drowned out by the terror engulfing the town. Maggie grabbed my arm, pulling me down an alleyway. "Where are we going?" I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. Somewhere safe, somewhere far from here. But even as I said it, a cold chill ran down my spine. I wasn't sure if anywhere was safe anymore. The world, as we knew it, was ending, and all we could do was try to survive. Maggie and I darted into the alley, the narrow walls pressing close as we stumbled over trash cans and scattered crates. Behind us, the horrifying, hungry groans grew louder, closer. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel them. Shadows stretched out, fingers reaching, bodies stumbling and teeth snapping. "Jed, they're right behind us!" Maggie's voice was thin with fear. "Just keep moving," I shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her forward. "There's a fire escape ladder up ahead." I could hear their ragged breaths, so close I felt like any second one would grab my shirt and drag me down. We finally reached the ladder bolted to the side of the brick building, and I pushed Maggie towards it. "Climb, Maggie," I barked, keeping my back to her, my eyes on the advancing swarm. She gripped the ladder, her hands trembling as she scrambled upward. The first of the zombies stumbled into the alley, dead eyes locking onto me. I grabbed a metal trash can lid lying nearby and swung it hard, cracking one zombie across the face. Its head snapped back, but that dead, vacant stare fixed on me again almost immediately. Another one lurched forward, arms outstretched, blackened nails clawing at the air. My heart hammered as I swung the lid again, this time with enough force to knock the creature back a few steps. "Jed, come on!" Maggie was halfway up the ladder, staring down with wide, terrified eyes. I jumped onto the bottom rung, heaving myself up just as more hands reached out for my legs. They scraped the metal, fingers grazing my ankle as I hauled myself higher. I climbed fast, almost tripping over my own hands as I scrambled up, the groans echoing up the metal, haunting me with every step. Just as I pulled myself onto the rooftop, Maggie grabbed my arm and yanked me up. We collapsed for a second, gasping for breath, hearts pounding in rhythm with the frenzied sounds below. But there was no time to rest. Below us, the zombies were gathering, piling into the alley, filling every inch of space like water rising in a sealed room. They clawed at the walls, reaching in vain for the fire escape, some even banging their heads against the bricks, determined but dumb, their dead eyes fixed on us. Maggie looked down, her face pale. "They can't climb, right?" I shook my head, breathing hard. "No, they're just desperate. We're safe here." But even as I said it, I noticed a few breaking off from the group and staggering around the side of the building. A cold realization hit me. They were trying to find another way up. I'd assumed they were just mindless, but seeing them move like this, like they were learning, filled me with a new, chilling dread. "Jed, what do we do?" Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. I scanned the area, spotting a gap between our rooftop and the next building. "We need to get across," I said. "We're not safe here. They're coming." Her eyes followed mine, and I could see her hesitation. "You really think we can make that?" "It's either that, or we wait until they find a way up here," I said, my voice hard but calm. "You trust me?" She took a shaky breath and nodded. "Yeah, let's go." I leapt first, clearing the gap with a hard thud as I landed on the opposite rooftop. I turned and held my hand out for her. She stared at the distance, took a deep breath, and jumped, catching my hand just as her feet hit the edge. I pulled her up, steadying her, and for a moment, we just stood there, catching our breath. The city falling into a twisted silence beneath us. But that silence didn't last. The groans picked up again. A relentless, constant reminder that they would follow us, that they wouldn't stop. We were in their world now, and I knew in some deep corner of my mind that we'd only managed to buy ourselves a little more time. Let me know in the comments below if you want to hear more from this story. click these videos for more zombie pack stories. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.